You're listening to Keith Sports News. Hello, folks. Welcome to a special edition of KSN, where I'm just going to talk about what are my favorite podcasts to listen to. That's right. Oh, for the first time, you see me shirtless. Yeah, I have no shirt on. Why? Because this is the last episode before I take my hiatus for a couple of weeks, alright? Yeah. I'm just gonna not, talk about sports for a couple of weeks. Because I think this is the time to take a little break. Alright? So, for a special edition of KSN, after doing 60 episodes in a span of 7 months, I will finally do this special episode where I give you my favorite sports talk podcasts. There's a few others that are not sports related, but most of these are sports related. Alright, here we go. So, you know what? How about we play some music, shall we? Which I normally don't do in these episodes. So let's do that. So, do y'all remember the longest episode I've ever done on this channel? Go back to episode 47, which was 2.5 hours. I believe that was the last time I played music, because the title of that episode was called So Much to Talk About. And the music that I was playing in that episode was Truck Simulator soundtracks. Yup. I'm going to do that again. Except I'm going to play them in shuffle mode. But I'm not going to, there's a bunch of them, which means I'm not going to be able to play all of them. I'll play the soundtracks until I'm done talking. Alright? So, I'm gonna do that. Because this is supposed to be a fun, special episode where I'm only talking about my favorite sports talk podcasts. Alright? You ready? Let's play the music. Alright, starting off with the American Truck Simulator soundtrack. Because if you follow the main channel, Eric Super Magnificent, then that is the top game played on that channel. That's the most common game. So yeah. You know what? When you're traveling a lot, you would either listen to music or podcasts. Yeah. So that's the cool thing. Alright? Keep yourself entertained. What if you somehow go on a trip and you listen to one of my episodes? That's kind of funny. Alright. So, now, before I begin, this might sound weird, but I actually, whenever I do episodes of me playing music, which is not often, whenever I do that, I actually can't hear the music while I'm recording. I know that sounds weird. It's because I'm using a laptop. Alright? I got my microphone plugged in. And when it's plugged in, it mutes the speaker. The laptop speaker. But I can change that. But if I were to play the actual audio coming out of my laptop speaker, then it might be kind of echoey for the video, unless if I put in headphones or earbuds. But yeah, so while I'm recording, I can't hear the music, but in the video, you guys can hear the music. Alright, so here we go. My favorite sports podcasts. I made a list. Of my favorite sports podcasts because there's a bunch of them, alright? And they are on 4 apps. Okay, I'm going to name the apps. Alright? We got Amazon Music, SiriusXM, ESPN, and YouTube. Like this podcast, Keith Sports News, is on YouTube for free. The ESPN app is also free, but not Amazon Music and SiriusXM. I don't pay for Amazon Music. It's actually my father who pays for Amazon Music. But SiriusXM, I do pay for that. There's so much on SiriusXM. So, yeah, 4 different apps. Alright? Let's start off with Amazon Music. Okay? So the app, Amazon Music. When did I first started using that app? It was back in 2017. I believe it was November of 2017. Okay? And I remember first using it. I thought, oh my gosh, this is awesome. I can find like almost any song I can think of that is copyrighted. So yeah, first, for years, I've only used Amazon Music for just music. And you know what was the first kind of music I thought of listening to or checking out? The category? WWE music. The wrestlers' entrance music. Because at the time, in 2017, I was a big fan of the product. Okay, so I looked up the wrestlers' theme songs at the time. Of course, John Cena, Randy Orton, Triple H. Well, he has 2 of them. The Game and the King of Kings. Okay? Undertaker. Of course, the legends. So, and then over the years, I would get more into the old wrestling. And I got into knowing their old theme music. And a bunch of those, if not all of them, are on Amazon Music. Recent years, I found out that there is a podcast section category on Amazon Music. So at first I wasn't really interested in listening to any podcasts until about, I want to say 2 years ago. But last year, almost a whole year ago, this is when I really got into podcasts. Listening to them on a daily basis during the weekdays, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. On the weekends, not so much, because a lot of the sporting events happens on the weekends. And that's why I do 2 episodes a week, mainly Mondays and Fridays, of me talking about what's going on before the weekend on Fridays, and after the weekend on Mondays. Yeah, Mondays and Fridays are really the 2 biggest days for sports talk podcasts. Yeah, it really is. Alright. And a lot of these podcasts they would do episodes during the weekdays, like me. Alright? So, yeah, I started listening to a bunch of podcasts. It was, I want to say, the day after Labor Day. Okay, so the first week of September, right after week 1 of college football season, and right before week 1 of the National Football League season. That's when I said, okay, America loves football. I think this is the right time for me to start listening to a bunch of podcasts, because a bunch of them talk about football season anyways. So that's when I started. Okay, yeah, I put in the date. September 9 of last year, 2024, is when I started listening to these podcasts on a weekly basis. Alright? But some podcasts I've listened to before 2024, and I'll talk about which ones. So, Amazon Music, alright? So, the first show that I would listen to on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday is the Tony Kornheiser Show, okay? Tony Kornheiser, you may know him, you may see him on the longtime ESPN show called Pardon the Interruption, PTI for short, okay? I've watched that show for years, okay? I've always liked that show, him and Michael Wilbon, okay? That's like one of the last long-time ESPN shows that is still going to this day with the same people, the same two guys, okay? I've always liked that show. I think that's my number one favorite ESPN show. I actually like that more than the Sports Center show itself. I do. You know, it's a short show, only 30 minutes. Amazon Music actually has Pardon the Interruption, but without ads. Yeah, no ads. Ad-free. Before that, I would listen to that show on ESPN app. But on the ESPN app, that show would have commercials. And which, you know, I don't mind commercials on podcasts because it's just audio, right? But for whatever reason, the commercials were so much louder than the actual show, and that started to bother me. Like, the volume level was a big difference. The commercials were so much louder than the actual show, and I'm like, oh my gosh, why are these commercials so damn loud? Then I'm like, I don't like this. It's starting to bother me. So then I found out that Amazon Music has Pardon the Interruption, PTI, ad-free. No commercials. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about. However, for whatever reason, the audio for that show is very low. You have to like turn it up, you know? Sirius XM shows, you have to turn it down. You know, the Sirius XM show volumes are much higher than the Pardon the Interruption show itself on, you know, podcasts, audio only. But the show is also on TV. They would usually air it at 4:30 p.m. Central Time. But when I was younger, I would usually watch that show on TV, and that was because back then I didn't know you can just listen to that show on audio. And the past year or two, I mostly would listen to that show instead of actually watching the show, because it's the same thing. It's, you know, you don't really have to watch that show. You can really just listen to it. Kind of like me with this podcast. Yes, I'm talking to the webcam. You don't have to watch the video because it's just me talking to the webcam. Alright? So you can just listen to this as a podcast on your phone, computer, or whatever. However, if you do listen to this on your phone, and you know how, here's my phone for example, here's the power button to turn it on and off. Okay. Yes, look what time it is. It's after 3 a.m. when I'm recording this. I would usually record this right before I go to bed. Yeah. So, YouTube, okay? YouTube's great, alright? when you're playing a video on YouTube and you decided to turn off the screen, it stops the video. It pauses the video. But if you get YouTube Premium, and if you play a video on YouTube and you turn off the screen, it'll still play the video. And you can just listen to the video as audio. And that really helps. I have YouTube Premium. However, you have to pay monthly. You have to have a subscription for that. I think it's like $10 to $15 a month. And to me, it's worth it because I'm on YouTube a lot, every day. Yeah, so it's worth it. And I got sick of the ads. Over the years, I got sick of the ads. So I got YouTube Premium. Alright. So yeah, back to Amazon Music. The Tony Kornheiser Show. So yeah, he's well known for the host of being on Pardon the Interruption, PTI, with Michael Wilbon. And I never knew at the time that he has his own podcast. So one day I was looking on Amazon Music, the podcast category, and I saw something called the Tony Kornheiser Show, and I'm like, oh, he has his own podcast? Is it live, or is it just an episode? They're episodes. He would record them in the mornings. Alright, so by the time I'm ready to listen to that show, it's ready. So that's what I would do. They're about an hour. It's an hour long. Well, with the commercials. I've always liked Tony Kornheiser. I've always liked him. He's got a great voice. And it's hard to believe how old he is. He doesn't look like he's that old. He doesn't sound like he's that old. He can still do it. He's got that voice of his. And he used to be a broadcaster for Monday Night Football. I looked him up and I was reading about him. He used to be one of the announcers for Monday Night Football with Mike Tirico and I think John Gruden as well. I don't know. Well, I don't know if John Gruden was there or not, but I know for sure it was with Mike Tirico. There might have been a third guy. But Tony Kornheiser was actually part of the broadcast team. 2006. It was the season after Al Michaels left for NBC Sunday Night Football. Okay, so they brought in Mike Tirico and Tony Kornheiser. And Tony Kornheiser didn't last too long. It's mainly because he has a fear of flying. He doesn't like flying. And hey, I get it. Some people don't like flying. John Madden never liked flying. That's why he always takes the bus instead. He has his own customized bus. Okay? So then, pretty much after Tony Kornheiser stepped down as one of the announcers for Monday Night Football, he kind of just did his own podcast and, of course, hosting Pardon the Interruption. And he's great. He mainly has two guests on his show. Two guests. Okay? And, he would talk about the big sports topics. Alright? Yeah, they would have 4 segments of the Tony Kornheiser Show. The first one is him talking about on how he's doing. What did he do over the weekend? And then, second and third segments are his special guests. And then the last segment is him reading emails. Yeah, you can send him emails and he would read them in a future episode. I've never done that before. I never called in a show. I never emailed to a show. But I always like hearing what other people have to say. If I ever call in a show or email a show, I will let you know. And if they respond to me, then I will let you know how that goes. And then, after he ends his show, he would play like a song or two. And I assume those songs are copyrighted. I usually don't listen to those songs. As soon as he's done with his episode, I would move on to the next show. But yeah, I've always liked that show. And of course, Pardon the Interruption. Alright, the next show on Amazon Music is the Dan Patrick Show. Okay, so Dan Patrick, longtime radio broadcaster, radio host. I remember many years ago, the early years of when I got into sports, I remember watching his show. And his YouTube channel as well. Mainly the interviews. He interviews a lot of people. And he has his own YouTube channel, so you can always check out his interviews. And his show is also... Okay, so his show used to be on NBC Sports channel, which no longer is a channel. It got discontinued. Excuse me when I get a drink here. Yeah, his show used to be on NBC Sports, and it got discontinued mainly because of Peacock. Peacock is NBC's streaming service. You know, Peacock is part of NBC. NBC's logo is, in fact, a peacock. Alright? So his show is now on Peacock. Alright? I wouldn't watch the whole show or listen to the whole show because it's 3 hours with commercials. It's on the weekdays, Monday through Fridays, from 8 to 11 a.m. Central Time. Alright. So, I guess the soundtrack has already ended? If so, then that's really quick. I don't think so. Huh. Well, that's weird. Let's just, play a few more, even though if some of these you probably have already heard of, so that's okay. I'll just play the second half of the playlist. I don't know why it just stopped. It's on a playlist on YouTube. Anyways, back to what I was saying. So yeah, the Dan Patrick Show, longtime radio voice. He actually used to be on ESPN in the old days, and then he left. I forgot what the reason why he left. I think he was unhappy at the time. But then he went, you know, he wanted to be more focused on his podcast, and his show became bigger over the years. And then he went to NBC. He went to NBC mainly for Sunday Night Football. I think he became one of the hosts, the studio host with Bob Costas, even though they're not actually together. And I think Dan Patrick also did some of the Olympic Games, because the Olympic Games are on NBC. But now that he's getting older, like Tony Kornheiser, he would just mainly do his own podcasts, alright? And I've always liked listening to him. He's got a great voice, another great radio voice, okay? Yeah, again, he has his own YouTube channel. Sometimes I would check that out, depending on, you know, his interview videos, depending on who he's talking to, who he has on as a special guest. But for the past year or so, I would mainly listen to it on Amazon Music, only audio. So they broke it up into 3 parts. You got an episode for hour number 1, an episode for hour number 2, and an episode for hour number 3. Okay? And it tells you what the topic is, and they have a description, you know, so I would read those to see if I'm interested in listening to that episode. But here's one cool thing about Amazon Music for the Dan Patrick Show, is that there would be one called The Best of the Dan Patrick Show. Yeah. It's like another 1-hour version. So mainly the interviews are in what's it called? Yeah, the Best of the Dan Patrick Show. Excuse me while I turn on my fan because I'm getting hot. Another reason why I have my shirt off. So yeah. instead of listening to the whole show, I would listen to the best of the Dan Patrick Show from that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. Because it'll be quicker. And because there's more podcasts that I would like to listen to. Yeah, so his show is in the mornings, Monday through Fridays, from 8 to 11 a.m. on Peacock. And then, of course, he has the YouTube channel where they would upload clips of the show and mainly the interviews. All right. However, recently I found out that his show is also on Sirius XM. So I might just listen to that show on Sirius XM, and it's basically the same thing as Amazon Music. Except I think they have different commercials. Alright. Next, the Stephen A. Smith Show. Stephen A. Smith. Probably like the #1 ESPN personality right now. Now, I know a lot of people don't like Stephen A. Smith, and I understand why. I've always liked him. I never had a problem with him. I find him entertaining. I remember first started watching the show called First Take, when they used to had Skip Bayless, and then they brought in Max Kellerman, okay? The old days. I guess we can say the good old days of First Take. Stephen A. Smith was on there, and he still is on today's First Take, except he's more of a busy guy, alright? And I forgot how I found out his show. I think I first found his YouTube channel, and then I checked to see if his show is on Amazon Music, and it is. I found his show on Amazon Music as well. And his show, he's like a straight shooter, you know? He talks whatever comes to his mind. You know, he's mainly a basketball analyst. The NBA on ESPN, that's mainly the sport that he talks about, alright? He's from New York, so he's obviously a big New York Knicks fan and Yankees fan. I forget if he's a Giants fan. He might be. But I know in the National Football League, he makes fun of the Dallas Cowboys, and I forgot why. I guess it's because they're an overrated team. They're not the same Dallas Cowboys from the glory days when they had Troy Aikman, you know, that was their golden era. They haven't won a Super Bowl and been to a Super Bowl in 30 years, or even an NFC championship game, so I guess he likes to make fun of them. I mean, I find that entertaining. So, but yeah, his show, you know, it's mainly a sports show, but it's also a political show. He will talk about politics. He's actually kind of getting into politics, which I have no problem with. Yeah, his show is half politics, half sports. Some episodes it'll just be sports. Some episodes it'll just be politics. So yeah, I have no problem of him talking about politics. I'm not one of those people that get offended real easily like a lot of people do nowadays. It's a crazy world that we're living in. But yeah, another great, well-known voice. As I speak, his show's on a hiatus for like a month. I guess he's taking a long vacation, but I heard that he's going to bring back his podcast on Sirius XM. I think it's the day after Labor Day. So I'm looking forward to that. I don't know if it's going to be like a totally different show, or is it going to be the same Stephen A. Smith show. We'll have to see. We'll have to see. Maybe that's why his show's on a hiatus. Another show. Now, this is only a political show. Bill O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly's No Spin News and Analysis. Yes, this is not a sports show. This is a political show. I'm not a huge political guy. I don't listen to politics every day, but sometimes, from time to time, I would. Not a bunch, though. And this is the show that I would listen to for politics. Because Bill O'Reilly, I remember many years ago, I remember watching his show on Fox News, The O'Reilly Factor. I remember watching his show back then, sometimes. It would come on at like 7 or 8 p.m. Central. I think it was 7 p.m. And then he got fired from Fox News for sexual harassment. And pretty much ever since, he started his own podcast called the No Spin News and Analysis. He has a YouTube channel of that show as well. But same thing, he would just mainly talk to the camera, so I can just listen to his show on audio. And yeah, I've always liked him. Because, I remember watching his show on Fox News, so I'm like, oh, it's great to hear and see Bill O'Reilly again. Alright? So yeah, it's mainly a political show. Mainly, I remember I put the dates in on when I started listening to these shows. So both the Stephen A. Smith Show and the Bill O'Reilly's No Spin News and Analysis, that was like a week after the presidential election last year. That's when I started listening to those shows on a weekly basis. Yes, and then sometimes Bill O'Reilly would have Stephen A. Smith on his show, and sometimes Stephen A. Smith would have Bill O'Reilly on his show. Okay. Pardon the interruption, I already talked about that. Oh, and another one. Another one's called Politics by Faith with Mike Slater. And I got into that show on May 2nd of this year, 2025. Here's how I got into that show. Okay, so this is interesting. Bill O'Reilly's No Spin News and Analysis. So on there, Amazon Music, they would have something called the O'Reilly Update, and the guy who speaks in those shorts is Mike Slater. And then, May 2nd, around that time, I would hear, or late April I should say, I would hear like a commercial of Mike Slater promoting his show. It's a political show, but it has something to do with religion, Christianity, Jesus Christ. So I'm like, that sounds interesting to me. So I would listen to that, and I find it kind of interesting. I'm not a big religious guy, I'm not a big political guy, but, this crazy world that we're living in, why not check it out? So yeah, those shows I would listen to from time to time. Alright? And that's all the Amazon Music podcasts. I'll save SiriusXM for last. Let's move on to ESPN. Now, ESPN is really the first app I got in terms of listening to sports talk podcasts. Okay, so on here, these are my favorite ones, alright? Baseball Tonight with Buster Olney. They would talk about what's going on in Major League Baseball. I'm not a huge fan of today's Major League Baseball, but I still would like to know what's going on. And that's one of the shows that I would listen to get my baseball news. And I've always liked Buster Olney. Okay? Alright, the soundtrack has ended. So you know what I'm going to play next? That was the American Truck Simulator soundtrack. Let's play the Euro Truck Simulator 2 soundtracks. I'll play that in random as well. Alright? Who knows? Maybe I will play all these soundtracks. I don't know how long this episode's going to be. I got no time limit. I'm not on the clock like some shows are that are being telecast. Most of my episodes are from 30 minutes to an hour. Maybe around 45 minutes. So yeah, Baseball Tonight, the podcast with Buster Olney. I've always liked the ESPN announcers, and it's sad as I speak. If this is true, this is ESPN's final season broadcasting Sunday Night Baseball, and it's very unfortunate unless if they can come up with a new contract or something. I hope they stay. I've always liked the guys on there. But I remember the old Baseball Tonight, or excuse me, the old Sunday Night Baseball from the early to mid 2010s. I like that era. Yeah. Well, no, until 2018, when they had Dan Shulman. Dan Shulman was the voice of Sunday Night Baseball in those years. Yeah, Buster Olney has been on ESPN for a long time. I do enjoy listening to his podcast. He would mainly do these episodes, his podcast on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Alright. Yeah, every 2 days. Just like the Tony Kornheiser show. Alright? And yeah, he would have on great guests. You know, I've always liked, he would talk to Carl Ravitch, Eduardo Perez, David Cohn, Tim Kirchin, John Boog Shambi. I like all those people. Yeah. Especially Tim Kirchin, because he's the oldest. He's been covering baseball since, 1979? Oh my gosh. And he's kind of a funny guy. So, yeah, I hope this isn't their last year broadcasting Sunday night baseball games. So, yeah, even though I'm not a huge fan of today's MLB, I would still want to know what's going on, and that is one of the shows that I would listen to get my baseball news. Now, I would only listen to that show during the season. So during the off season, I don't listen much of that show because I don't really care what's going on in the off season for any sports league. However, I would listen to this show from February to November, okay? Alright, so the winter season, December and January, and a little bit of February, I don't listen to that show because that's the off season. I don't really care what's going on. I do the same thing with American football, alright? Which the next podcast on ESPN, College Game Day with Reese Davis and Pete Thamel. Alright? This is for college football news. Alright? And yeah, I've listened to this show for years. I've always liked this show. I've always liked Reese Davis, Pete Thamel, and they would get some frequent guests on there. Reese Davis is the host of College Game Day, and I remember, watching College Game Day. Same thing. I would listen to the show during the season and not much during the off season. So in this case, it'll be from August to May. Why until May? Because they would actually, after the college football season is over, not too long after, you get college basketball gets interesting. Eventually, March Madness, they would talk about that. And then, not too long after March Madness tournament comes to an end, you get the NFL Draft in late April, and then they would talk about that as well. And then not too far after that, that's when I'm like, okay, I think I'm done listening to this podcast until August. Alright? Okay. Another college football show. It's called College Football Live with Victoria Arlen. I think that show is still going on. They would have, the main well-known college football analyst, Desmond Howard, Stanford Steve, who else? Pete Thamel will also be on that show as well. It's only a 30-minute show, but they would give us the big news on what's going on in college football. College football is one of the first sports that I kind of got into. Yeah. And I got into it, and I became a huge college football fan. And I still like watching it. I wouldn't call myself a huge fan anymore because it's kind of a different era in college football. But I mainly watch the SEC games on ABC because, in my opinion, they have the top 3 commentating teams. Joe Tessitore with Jesse Palmer, Sean McDonough with Greg McElroy, and the number 1 team, Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit. Those are the top 3, in my opinion. And they all do SEC games on ABC. That's pretty much the only games I watch. Plus, I live in the Southeast. I live in the capital city of Louisiana, so obviously the team to watch is LSU football. Even though I'm not I gotta be honest, I used to be a big fan of LSU football. Not much anymore. It's because I've realized that they have like the most obnoxious fans. LSU football has like the most obnoxious fans. But when I was younger, I didn't realize that because I was still growing up into my early teens. You know, now that I'm an adult, I realize, geez, these LSU fans are really spoiled. But, you know, I still wish them well. But, you know, if that one season back in 2021 where they let go Ed Orgeron, the season after they won the national championship game, it's like, oh my gosh, these fans are so spoiled. My goodness. Hey, I wish them well, but if they're gonna lose 5-6 games in a season, I'm not gonna get mad. I'm not gonna get mad about it. But if they win every game, I might jump on the bandwagon and root for them to go all the way to the national championship game. And that, you know, I remember I did that in the 2019 LSU football season when they won the championship in 2020 in January with Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow went from a Bayou Bengal to a Cincinnati Bengal. It's amazing. All right. Speaking of Stanford Steve, the next podcast on ESPN, SV Pod with Scott Van Pelt and Stanford Steve. It's mainly a football show, mainly college football and NFL. But during the off seasons, they would talk about golf. Yeah, they're also big golf fans. I'm not a big golf fan, but I would listen to this show mainly during the football season as well, where they would give their predictions and recap, mainly on Mondays, or if not Mondays, Tuesdays. All right, so they would talk about that. I've always liked Scott Van Pelt. My favorite, you know, I'm not a huge fan of the American Sports Center, but I still like watching Sports Center with Scott Van Pelt. He does the show by himself, and he would have like some guests on his show. He's kind of like Jay Onright on TSN. You know, he does the show by himself, and he would have guests on throughout the show. And yeah, I've always liked Scott Van Pelt. I miss his old studio. Do y'all remember the old studio that he was in before he moved to DC? I mean, the DC studio looks nice, but the old one, the studio before that, I like that one. I miss that studio. That studio it was like a big-ass studio. It just looked great. You know, I don't know. I don't know why he moved to DC, but that was his choice. Yeah. Which means his show is live. Yeah, Scott Van Pelt, not the podcast. I'm talking about his Sports Center show. His Sports Center show would be live, meaning for him it'll be late at night because DC's in the East Coast. All right. Yeah, I've always liked him. He's been on ESPN for a long time. And, you know, on big sports nights, such as the college football national championship game, I would watch Scott Van Pelt. Yeah, he's a great guy. And yeah, his podcast is with Stanford Steve. Here's the thing. His podcast is uncensored. Like, a couple years ago, it wasn't uncensored. Like, and years before that, they wouldn't say bad words. And then, like, a couple years ago, they would say bad words, but they would censor them. And now it's uncensored. Yeah, so you've been warned. Bad words on that channel. I don't know why, when I first heard Scott drop the F-bomb, like, whoa. I mean, I'm not offended. I don't care about bad words. But that was like a first time I heard him say the F word. And I'm like, okay, is this... it's not censored anymore? It's now uncensored? Oh, okay. And now I got used to it. I don't know why it has bad words, but I guess they're allowed to say bad words. A lot of these podcasts, they can't say bad words. Some of them, there are others that do say bad words. I'll get to those a little later. But yeah. I like that show. Now, more shows on ESPN. Two of them are... No. Just one. Excuse me. The next show. The Paul Feinbaum Show. Another football show. Well, it's only college football. Mainly SEC football. The mouth of the South. Well, the real mouth of the South is Jimmy Hart. But I don't know how Paul Feinbaum got his mouth of the South. But yeah, Paul Feinbaum, longtime SEC, what do you call it? Journalist, I think. Yeah, he's been around for a long time. His show, and then he is one of the people on a show called SEC Nation, which is like their college game day version of the SEC network. I actually like that show more than College Game Day, because the main conference I watch is SEC anyways. I don't really care much about the other conferences that much. But yeah, Paul Feinbaum, I've always liked him. Yeah, his show, I remember started listening to his show, I think it was, or watching his show, yes. His show is on SEC Network. That's right. From 2 to 6 p.m. Central Time. Okay? About 4 hours. Alright? But you can also listen to it on the ESPN app for free. Alright? Just audio. Remember, it's just audio. Okay? And I remember I started doing that in 2021. Listening to his show on audio on the ESPN app. But sometimes I would tune in if I'm home. I would mainly watch his final hour of the show, so at 5 p.m. Central, okay? And yeah, he takes a lot of calls. Because it's a 4-hour show. I mean, yes, he would have some guests on his show, but it's a lot of calls. And I mentioned earlier, I've never called in a show, but if I ever do, I will let you know and tell you my side of the story of that. But a lot of people call in that show, and he would take calls one after another, and a lot of his calls are well-known people. There's quite a bit of people that call in that show every day or every other day. And I'm like, oh, it's this guy. He calls in a lot. Another guy that calls in a lot. It's mainly Alabama fans. Because Alabama football has a great history. They do. And a lot of their callers, they sound drunk. Yeah, a lot of football fans are drunk. I don't drink, and I'm glad I don't drink, even though I'm old enough to drink. But yeah, I like to hear what the other callers have to say. I find it funny. And some of the callers, they rant on the air, and they give Feinbaum the business, you know. They would like trash talk him, and Paul Feinbaum, he's a chill guy, you know. He lets them say what they want, but if you say a bad word, he cuts you off. He hits the hang up button. Nope, can't say bad words on the show. And once in a while, I would hear a caller say a bad word. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, so Paul Feinbaum, the mouth of the South of the SEC. Yeah, same thing with the other podcasts. I would only listen to that show during the season. I don't really listen to that show during the off season because I really don't care what's going on during the off season. Just like Pardon the Interruption, the commercials are so much louder than the actual show. However, I found that that show is on Sirius XM, so I'm hoping that the commercials are not going to be a lot louder than the actual show, because that started to bother me too, and I'm like, oh my gosh, because I would listen to these in my earbuds when I'm not at home, and I'm like, geez, why is the commercial so much louder than the show? So I'm hoping it's not like that on Sirius XM. So when I start listening to the Paul Feinbaum show again, I'm going to do it on Sirius XM, and hopefully the commercials won't be a lot louder than the actual show. Another show that I would listen to, let me take another drink here, is the Michael Kay Show. Michael Kay is the voice of the New York Yankees, alright? He's been the voice of the Yankees for a long time on TV, and back in the 90s he was with John Sterling doing the radio broadcast. You know, John Sterling just retired after last year's World Series, and I remember I said, you know what, since this is his last rodeo, I'm going to listen to the World Series only on radio. And that's what I did. That's what I did. Last year's World Series was huge, you know, and I'm glad he was able to retire after the World Series. Even though the Yankees lost, it was great that we were able to listen to him call one last World Series. And the guy who succeeded him is Dave Sims. Dave Sims used to be the Seattle Mariners TV announcer, play-by-play. So yeah, another great, well-known voice. Michael Kay. There's some people that don't like him, and I understand that because it is the New York Yankees. You know, they're like the Dallas Cowboys. Even though, except the Cowboys are not as great as the Yankees, if you know what I mean. And you know, there's a lot of Yankee fans out there, but there's also a lot of Yankee haters, just like the Cowboys. There's a lot of Cowboy fans out there, and there's also a lot of Cowboys haters. But I've always liked Michael Kay. I'm not a Yankees fan, however, I was rooting for the Yankees in the World Series last year. I really was. Yeah, this show... Okay, so his current show, as I speak, he does the show solo from 12 to 2 p.m. Central Time, only on radio, only audio. However, he started doing it at the beginning of this year, January of 2025. He decided to do the show solo. So last year, 2024, and before that, his show was on television and radio. He was with Don LaGreca and Peter Rosenberg, okay? 3 of those guys would be together, and the show would be on from 2 to 5:30 p.m. Central Time, or sometimes until 6 p.m. So about 3.5 to 4 hours. Yeah, on at the exact same time with the Paul Feinbaum show. And sometimes I would go back and forth, listen to both of those shows live. But now I can't do that anymore because the new Michael Kay show, he's doing the show solo, and it's from 12 to 2 p.m. Central Time. So after his show is over, the Paul Feinbaum show would come on. Okay? And then he finally was able to interview Paul Feinbaum because both shows are no longer at the exact same time. But I liked both versions of the Michael Kay show. I really liked the Michael Kay show when he was with Don LaGreca and Peter Rosenberg. And that show was telecast on the Yes Network. The Yes Network, home of the New York Yankees games. Okay, I have the Yes Network, even though I live nowhere near New York City. And they mainly talk about New York sports, Yankees, Knicks, okay, Mets, what else? Rangers for hockey. Of course, the Jets and Giants for the National Football League. Yeah, because there's a lot of New York teams in sports. And I got into listening to that show. I started listening to that show in 2023. You know, Michael Kay, Don LaGreca, Peter Rosenberg, and then when I didn't know at the time that Michael Kay decided to make a change, that he would go solo. He would do his show solo in 2025, and at the time it was my off season listening to that show. I mainly listened to that show for baseball news, New York Yankees news, New York Mets news, okay? I don't really care much about the New York Knicks news because I'm not a huge NBA fan. Sometimes I would like to hear the New York Jets and the New York Giants, even though recent years both teams are not that great. But Yankees and Mets, they are great, you know? Let's be real here. If New York had to choose one sports team to have, it would have to be the New York Yankees because of their history. Yeah. Babe Ruth, you know? People still talk about Babe Ruth to this day, you know? So, it has to be the New York Yankees. It's not even close. Yankees are number one, okay? Yeah, I really got into listening to the Michael Kay show. I really liked it when it was with Don LaGreca and Peter Rosenberg, and sometimes I get to watch their show on the Yes Network if I'm at home. Same with the Paul Feinbaum show. And then in December, they announced that Michael Kay is going to make a change, and he's going to do his show solo from 12 to 2 p.m. Central Time, only on radio. And I didn't know that at the time, because in December, that was my off season from that show. Okay? Because the main thing I want to listen to from Michael Kay is the New York Yankees, because he is the Yankees announcer after all. Alright? But then I figured out, so he's now doing the show solo. He's no longer with Don LaGreca and Peter Rosenberg. Okay. So when I started listening to his show solo, I actually liked it. Yeah. I actually liked his show solo. But part of me wished he was still with Don LaGreca and Peter Rosenberg, because I also like Don and Peter. Don and Peter, they're in a show together. They're in a news show together with another guy named Alan Hahn. I don't listen to that show very much. Which leads to the next show. It's called Evening Nightly News. ENN for short, with Peter Rosenberg. So his show, that show's about 30 minutes. Okay. It's basically Peter Rosenberg talking about the big sports stories, and he would play highlights from okay, so the current show that he's on, it's called the Don Allen Peter Show or something like that. No, I think it's called the Don Hahn Rosenberg Show. But last year and before, it was with the Michael Kay Show, so there would be a 30-minute segment called Evening Nightly News with Peter Rosenberg, of him talking about the big sports stories and him playing highlights from the show from the first 2 hours, if that makes sense. So I think ENN comes on at 5 p.m. Central. So he would play like some highlights from hours 1 and hours number 2 of the same day. Yeah, just a quick show, kind of like Pardon the Interruption, 30 minutes. And Don LaGreca has his own podcast called Game Misconduct, and that is a hockey show. And speaking of Don LaGreca, I heard that he is now going to be the new voice of the New Jersey Devils on TV. Wow, that is some big news for Don LaGreca. But yeah, if I want to get my NHL news, it'll be from that show. Don LaGreca and Anthony Pusick. Anthony Pusick is the producer of the Michael K show, or the old Michael K show, and the current show that Don LaGreca is in with Peter Rosenberg, the Don, Hahn, and Rosenberg show. Yeah. So, same thing, I would only listen to that show during the NHL season. So, mainly during the playoffs, because the playoffs are wild, you know. And, yeah, those are the podcasts that I would listen to on the ESPN app. So the Michael K show, the Paul Feinbaum show, I can listen to those shows live if I want to. Okay? Now to YouTube. Okay? There's a few shows that I would listen to on YouTube. The first one is called Johnny Sports Network. Okay, so this is a very interesting story. The Johnny Sports Network is a YouTube channel, but he was known as Johnny Talks Sports. So he changed his name from Johnny Talks Sports to Johnny Sports Network. Okay, so how did I get into that YouTube channel? Well, he actually found me. He found my main channel, Eric Super Magnificent, back in 2015. Yeah, a long time ago. And we kind of just became online friends. Yeah. We both remembered each other ever since. Yeah. I know, right? He mainly talks about football, because let's be honest, football is the number one sport in America. In Canada, it's hockey. Okay, in Mexico, I assume it would have to be soccer. Alright? So, yeah. Now, Johnny Talks Sports, or Johnny Sports Network, he doesn't do a podcast series like I do. He would do regular videos of him talking about a big sports story, or shorts. So, but I can listen to his show as a podcast, because like I said, I have YouTube Premium. I mentioned I have YouTube Premium, where you have to pay that monthly, because I'm on YouTube every night, so, you know, I can play the video and turn off the screen, and then it'll still play the video, and I can only hear it. It can only do that on YouTube Premium. So if you have YouTube Premium and you think you can listen to a YouTube video without having the screen on, it won't do that. You have to have YouTube Premium in order for it to do that. So I think it's worth it, because I'm on YouTube literally every night. Yeah, YouTube's my drug. Yeah, I love it. Of course, this channel, Keith Sports News, KSN, and two other shows, wrestling related, pro wrestling related. One called Not Sam Wrestling and Rosenberg Wrestling. Not Sam Wrestling with Sam Roberts, and Rosenberg Wrestling with Peter Rosenberg. Yes, Peter Rosenberg, I just mentioned, who used to be with the Michael K show, and now he's with Don LaGreca and Alan Hahn, doing his own segment called Evening Nightly News on ESPN New York Radio, just like the Michael K show. But Peter Rosenberg is a huge pro wrestling fan, just like Sam Roberts. So I would listen to those shows of me getting my pro wrestling news. I'm not a huge fan of today's pro wrestling, but I still would like to know what's going on. Just like today's MLB. You know, I still want to know what's going on. And that's where I get my news from. Instead of just reading articles on the internet, which I still do sometimes, but I do like the people that I listen to. Sam Roberts, Peter Rosenberg, they have their own YouTube channels, and recently, SiriusXM, which I'm about to get into, they have their own shows on SiriusXM. a channel called Pro Wrestling Nation 24/7. How awesome is that? Yeah. And speaking of that, let's get into SiriusXM. The main wrestling show that I listen to is called Busted Open with Dave LaGreca. Dave LaGreca is Don LaGreca's younger brother. Okay, so Dave LaGreca is a huge pro wrestling fan, but his older brother Don LaGreca, he's not a big pro wrestling fan. But yeah, here's how I got SiriusXM. So I got a vehicle in August of 2022, and it gave me it came with SiriusXM, a 3-month free trial. And after the free trial ended, I had to pay a subscription, which I decided to do that. Okay, so towards the end of 2023, early 2024, I got SiriusXM. And throughout 2024, I got into listening to different shows. And then in the fall season, I got into listening to more shows on there, and one of them was Busted Open. I wanted to know if, hey, is there a pro wrestling show that I can listen to on there? And there is. Busted Open with Dave LaGreca, who is the main host. That is a daily show. 7 days a week. From 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. Central Time. You can listen to that show live, but I don't wake up early in the morning, so I don't have to listen to it live. And that's the best part about SiriusXM. You don't have to listen to the shows live. You can wait for a while, and then you can listen to that episode as an archive. Or if you decide to tune in live, you can pause the show, you can rewind the show, you can skim through the commercials. You know, it's great. Okay? So Busted Open, it's a great show for pro wrestling, and they also have their own YouTube channel as well. And Dave LaGreca, sometimes he would go on a rant, just like his brother Don LaGreca, when Don used to be on the Michael K show. And yeah, great voices. Great voices. Yeah. Busted Open. Every day. Now, Dave LaGreca, he's usually on Mondays through Fridays. Okay, so he would be with guys like Mark Henry, his co-hosts, Bully Ray, also known as Big Bubba Ray Dudley, Tommy Dreamer, ECW legend. You know, I'm a fan of this old pro wrestling stuff, and I remember I got to know these guys when they were active in-ring performers. All these guys, they're in their early to mid-50s. Well, now mid-50s. Yeah, I think they're all like 54 years old. So, yeah. 20 years ago, those guys, they were wrestlers. Dave LaGreca was never a wrestler, but he was always a big fan of wrestling. And his show, I believe his show started in 2009. And back then, it was just like a 30-minute to 1-hour show once a week. And then it became more popular. It became a weekly show, a daily show. It expanded to 2 hours, and then it eventually expanded to 3 hours. And now recently, they just announced a Pro Wrestling 24/7 channel. And then they added another show, Not Sam Wrestling. That's a Monday through Thursday show, okay? And he also has his own YouTube channel where he would do an episode on there once a week. Yeah, not Sam Roberts, he talks a ton of pro wrestling. And Sam Roberts, he would do the recap shows on WWE's YouTube channel. Like, oh my gosh, he's such a busy man. some guys are just really busy with traveling. Peter Rosenberg is like that as well, because Peter Rosenberg, he's also he's a big hip hop guy, so he's on like a hip hop show in the mornings, and then in the afternoon, he's in the sports show with Don LaGreca and Alan Hahn, and then during his free time, he would do his wrestling show called Cheap Heat. Cheap Heat is also on Sirius XM, which would be okay, for whatever reason the music stopped on shuffle, so I'm just gonna play whatever's left on the playlist. All right, so we might hear some of these soundtracks again, but if that's the case, oh well, it is what it is. So yeah, Cheap Heat with Peter Rosenberg. He has his own YouTube channel, and then recently they just announced that SiriusXM is launching a 24/7 pro wrestling channel, and Peter Rosenberg would have his show live, I think it's like for 1 hour on Fridays at 11 a.m. Central. For Not Sam Wrestling with Sam Roberts, it'll be from Mondays to Thursdays after Busted Open from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central. And then there would be a third show after that, and that show is called Off the Ropes with Jonathan Coachman. Yes, that show would come on from 1 to 3 p.m. on the weekdays. Jonathan Coachman, who used to be a WWE announcer. I've always liked the Coach. He's got a great voice. You know, he used to be part of the show. He used to be on the commentary team with Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler on Monday Night Raw during the Ruthless Aggression era. And then his final year, he was with Michael Cole on SmackDown. Then he left. He left the company to pursue a career at ESPN. And he wasn't seen on WWE television for many years. Then he finally came back. And then he rejoined Monday Night Raw as a commentator. At the time, this was in 2018. I was a big fan of the product at the time. He replaced Booker T, which I was kind of disappointed that Booker T got replaced. You know, I mean, I like Jonathan Coachman, but I also like Booker T. It would have been cool if we could get both of those guys together. You know. And then he also became the pre-show host of the big pay-per-views. Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, SummerSlam, Survivor Series, the Big Four. And then he left. He left the company again a couple years ago to do his own podcast. And I'm glad. I haven't heard his voice in years. Well, you know, in terms of him being on a regular show. So I'm glad I get to hear Jonathan Coachman talk pro wrestling again, even though, like I said, I'm not a big fan of today's wrestling, but I still want to know what's going on in today's wrestling, just like today's baseball and today's NFL, you know? So, yeah, it's called Off the Ropes with Jonathan Coachman. He would have some guys like Tommy Dreamer, Mark Henry, Dolph Ziggler, but his real name is Nick Nemeth. Yeah, just if you're a pro wrestling fan from the old days or even today, you've heard these guys' names before, especially if you've been a fan for many, many years. You know, if you're a new fan, you may not know these guys quite well, but if you get into listening to these shows, then oh my gosh, I can't wait to hear what Mark Henry has to say about this, or oh my goodness, Dave LaGreca is going to go on a rant, I guarantee it. I remember he went on a rant the night after WrestleMania this year. Yeah, it's crazy. So, yeah, technically, I listened to 1, 2, 3, 4 pro wrestling shows. It's crazy. And you know, WWE is the main thing that they would talk about. WWE is more popular than ever. It is. It really is. It's crazy, man, how it's like, it's so popular, like it's soccer. Soccer's the most popular sport. WWE is on that level. It's really worldwide. It really is. It's crazy. So I'm glad the WWE is very, very successful. There's more shows in stadiums now, which is insane. So good for them. Alright? So yeah, those are the wrestling shows that I would listen to. So let's stay on SiriusXM. I'm gonna save my number one favorite sports talk podcast for last. I'm gonna save that one for last, okay? And that is on SiriusXM, so we're gonna make our way over there. There's a bunch of shows that I listen to on SiriusXM because SiriusXM is the number one app for podcasts and live radio. And of course, music. There's a bunch of music channels, politics, news channels. Yeah, it's crazy. There's a channel that I do listen to sometimes. Let me get on it right now. Let me see. Channels. Okay, now let's talk about the channels that I listen to on SiriusXM. Actually, no, I'm going to save that for later, before I talk about my number one favorite sports talk podcast. Next, this is not in any particular order, I'm just looking at the list that I wrote down. Next, the Mike Francesa podcast. Okay, Mike Francesa. He mainly talks about New York sports, just like Michael Kay, New York Yankees, New York Mets, and of course, New York Jets, New York Giants. His show's about 30 minutes, and he would just do it. He would just do an episode whenever he wants, basically. So, and yeah, I kind of just, as of this recording, I kind of just got into that podcast. Yeah, some of these podcasts I kind of just got into. Some of these I started listening to them over a year or two ago. But Mike Francesa is one of the recent podcasts that I got into, and he's been around for a long time. All right. Another show. I'm gonna drink of water here. It's called Down the Stretch. It is a horse racing show. That's right. Yes, there's a horse racing podcast called Down the Stretch, and you can listen to that show live from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. or to 1 p.m. It's about, I think it's 3 hours. I think it's 3 hours from 9 a.m. to noon Central every Saturday. So once a week, every Saturday. Because Saturday is horse racing day. If you are a horse racing fan, I'm not a huge horse racing fan, but I mainly watch the Triple Crown races, the Kentucky Derby, the first Saturday in May. 2 weeks later is the Preakness Stakes in Baltimore, and 3 weeks later after that is the Belmont Stakes in New York. And I would listen to that show during that time of the year. So I don't really listen to that show very much, but during the spring and summer, the fall, the winter, not so much. The host on there is named, I think it's Bill Finley, and his partner, his co-host, is legendary horse racing announcer Dave Johnson. Dave Johnson, who used to be the voice of the Triple Crown on ABC back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And I remember I watched a lot of old Kentucky Derby races, old Preakness races, and old Belmont Stakes races, and he was the voice back then. His signature is, "And down the stretch they come," that was his signature, and he may be the greatest of all time. I think he is. He did it for a long time, and then when ABC lost the rights to the Triple Crown, when NBC took over, that's kind of when he that's kind of when he retired. And then he, eventually, what he does now is his podcast called Down the Stretch. It's on NBC Sports Radio. And it's crazy. He's in his mid-80s. It's hard to believe how old he is. He doesn't look like he's that old. He sounds the same. He doesn't sound like he's that old. He's just like John Sterling. John Sterling, it's hard to believe how old he is as well. He's got a great voice, just like Dave Johnson. So, yeah. He's everyone's favorite. So, yeah, horse racing. It's a 3-hour show, but however, I really don't listen to the entire episode. I mainly listen to the opening segment of the show, which is basically where they talk about the big news. Okay? So for example, after the Kentucky Derby race, the first thing that they talk about is the Kentucky Derby itself. The following Saturday. Yeah, so it's a once-a-week show in the mornings from 9 to noon Central. And yeah, it's great. Horse racing. Okay. Next is the Rich Eisen show. So it's kind of like the Dan Patrick show. Rich Eisen, his show can be seen on TV. The Roku channel. The Roku channel is actually free, believe it or not. Yes, there's a bunch of stuff on there. The Roku channel is actually free. Can you believe that? So, yeah, just like the Dan Patrick show, he has a YouTube channel where they post a bunch of the interviews that he talks to. And I've always liked Rich Eisen. I remember first listening to Rich Eisen when he was on the NFL Network. He's still on the NFL Network. He actually also used to be on ESPN, just like Dan Patrick. So they're kind of similar. But Rich Eisen, he mainly talks about football because, he's on the NFL Network. And he's got a great voice. I've always liked him. And, yeah, he gets a lot of great guests, just like the Dan Patrick show. Yeah. So, I found out that his show's on Sirius XM. And it's a 3-hour show. I believe it's a 2-hour show, I believe. Is it? No, it's a 3-hour show, I think. It's from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Pacific. So it's our early afternoon show, just like the Michael K show. So yeah, both those shows would be on at the same time, except Michael K show is 2 hours. Rich Eisen show is 3 hours. So yeah, and they would Sirius XM would break down the hour episode. So it would say hour number 1, what did they talk about in hour number 1? Same with hours number 2 and hours number 3. So yeah, it's a great show. It's very similar to the Dan Patrick show. Which one do I like more? I would probably say Dan Patrick. I think I like Dan Patrick a little more than Rich Eisen. But I think it's because I started listening to Dan Patrick first, and then I started listening to Rich Eisen. But sometimes Rich Eisen gets more special guests than Dan Patrick. Dan Patrick shows in the morning. And yeah, after his show comes to an end, you can listen to the Rich Eisen show after Dan Patrick's show comes to an end. So yeah, that's very cool. All right. Next is the Nikki and Bree show, and they're former wrestlers. Okay, Nikki Bella and Brie Bella, they're twin sisters. How I got into that show? Well, they were on Busted Open as special guests when Busted Open was at WrestleMania in Vegas. And they were saying that, oh, they have a podcast. And I'm like, oh, well, I should go check that out. And that's kind of how I got into that show. Yes, Nikki Bella and Brie Bella, identical twins. Well, they're not identical twins anymore, but they kind of used to be. They were, born on the same day. They're twin sisters, and they have a podcast. And they also have a YouTube channel as well. But I mainly listen to that show on Sirius XM. They just talk about pop culture, and I've always liked listening to them. So yeah, sometimes they will talk about wrestling, especially WrestleMania or SummerSlam. Those are like the two biggest WWE events of the year. Alright. They do 2 episodes a week, Mondays and Wednesdays. About 45 minutes. Another show that is about 45 minutes is the Dan Abrams Show. This is another political show that I would listen to sometimes. I found this show on Sirius XM. But Dan Abrams, I've always liked this guy. Dan Abrams, I remember the show called Live PD. Live PD was the #1 cable show at the time. 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. He was the host of Live PD. Okay? And I've always liked him as the host of Live PD. Live PD is basically like the show Cops. The show Cops with the theme song, Bad Boys, what you gonna do when they come for you? Yeah, it's basically like the show Cops, but except it's live for 3 hours. Okay? Well, it's not actually live, there's a tape delay, but it's happening the same night as they're on the air. Okay? And that is the first time I watched Dan Abrams, when he was the host of Live PD. And I remember watching the early episodes of Live PD. My father told me, hey, there's this live cop show called Live PD on A&E. We should go check it out. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, it started on late October of 2016. I really got into that show. At the time, we had Cox Cable, and we realized that we can record stuff, we can DVR stuff, so we don't have to sit through the commercials. And that's kind of what I did. We got rid of Cox in 2020, and 2020 was also the year where, unfortunately, Live PD they pulled the plug because of what happened. The leaked footage, someone dying on the scene with the police. That's kind of how the show came to an end, and especially after the George Floyd incident. If none of those 2 incidents happened, I bet you Live PD would still be on A&E to this day. And it probably would still be the #1 show. So then Dan Abrams, I don't know how long Dan Abrams has his podcast on Sirius XM, because I also kind of just found that show. But Dan Abrams, he's also on ABC. A big part of the election every year. I would see him on ABC. And, Live PD, when Live PD was a show. Okay? Oops, excuse me. Alright, the soundtrack has came to an end. I'm going to play one more soundtrack. And that is the Hunting Unlimited soundtrack, because I grew up listening to those. Alright, I'm going to play those in order this time, because I don't think I have yet to play those soundtracks. So yeah, another old classic games. Yeah, so yeah, those Truck Simulator soundtracks and the Hunting Simulator soundtracks, they were all made by the SCS software. Okay, so back to the Dan Abrams Show. I kind of just found this show on Sirius XM. It's a political show, but Dan Abrams used to be the host of Live PD until 2020, and then 2 years later, they brought the show back, but it's not the same show. It's a different show called On Patrol Live, and he is the host of that show. So that's great. They were able to bring a show like that back, and during 2020, 2021, and 2022, when there was no Live PD, he has a show, or he had a show on News Nation called The Dan Abrams Show, and that's where he would talk about politics. But now he no longer has that show, so maybe, I wonder, maybe after his News Nation show came to an end, maybe this is how he got into his Sirius XM show. I might be wrong. Maybe he had this Sirius XM show for years. I don't know. But yeah, I've always liked him. He has a great voice. And again, I'm not a huge political guy, but you know, him and Bill O'Reilly and sometimes Stephen A. Smith are the only guys I would listen to of them talking about politics, because they are well-known people, okay? Yeah, so that's a political show. Mondays through Fridays. The show is actually live at 1 p.m. Central, but I've never listened to it live. And that's the best part about SiriusXM. You don't have to listen to these shows live, alright? Next show on SiriusXM, there's a bunch of them. This one's called Holding Court with Patrick McEnroe, okay? This is a once-a-week show, just like Down the Stretch, the horse racing show. This is also a once-a-week show, and it's also on Saturdays. And you can listen to this show live, but it's on really early in the morning. Yeah, really early in the morning, I think at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. Central. I'm like, nope, I'm not waking up early to listen to that show live. But thankfully, you don't have to listen to the show live. So I would listen to that show as an archive, and I really like that show. It is mainly a tennis show. Patrick McEnroe, longtime ESPN tennis commentator. He has his older brother, Patrick McEnroe. They would call matches together, and then during the finals, they would be with Chris Fowler. Yes, Chris Fowler, the voice of college football, who is also one of the big voices of tennis on ESPN. And I used to be a huge fan of tennis. I'm not a huge tennis fan now, but I mainly watch the Grand Slams. And, yeah, Patrick McEnroe is a great guy. I've always liked, he has a great voice, just like Chris Fowler. Yeah, once a week, Saturdays, him talking about the world of tennis. And I really like that show. I wish that show was longer. I wish that show was like an extra 30 minutes or an extra hour. Or I wish that show was twice a week. Yeah. Yeah. It should be longer, or it should be... Either it should be a 2-hour show on Saturdays, or have the show on twice a week. Maybe every Wednesday and Saturdays. Maybe I'll call in. But I have to wake up real early to do that. Hey, Mr. McEnroe, I love your show, bro. I wish it was longer. It should be an extra hour, or maybe do another 1-hour show on Wednesday, twice a week. Kind of like Busted Open, how Busted Open started, you know, the pro wrestling show. So, yeah, it's a great show. That's a tennis show. Another show that I kind of like listening to is called Basketball and Beyond with Coach K, Mike Krzyzewski, the greatest, perhaps the greatest college basketball coach of all time when he was with Duke for over 40 years. I found out that he has his own podcast on SiriusXM, and he's an old guy. He's another guy that doesn't look like his age, you know. Yeah, the main thing about that show is they would get some great guests. One time they had Nick Saban on, one great college basketball coach. Yeah, probably the greatest college basketball coach of all time, talking to the greatest college football coach of all time. I mean, wow, that was a must-listen episode. Yeah, they would have that show during the college basketball season. During the off season, they don't do a show. Same thing with this next show called Let's Go with Bill Belichick and Jim Gray. This show is only during the NFL's regular season, and the postseason as well. So, you know, September, October, November, December, and January and February. I started listening to the show last year during the 2024 NFL season. Bill Belichick, many would consider he is the greatest NFL coach of all time. Now he's getting back into coaching, except he is now the college football coach at North Carolina. To me, that is going to be the biggest that's the biggest college football story. Bill Belichick, now the North Carolina football coach. I think I will definitely watch North Carolina's first game, whenever that is. Just because of him. Without Belichick, I wouldn't watch that game. I wouldn't be watching North Carolina football. So, I wish him well. Which means I don't think he's going to be on that show anymore called Let's Go with Jim Gray. I think someone's going to replace Belichick because Belichick is now the North Carolina head coach. But last year, when he wasn't coaching, he was on the Manning cast on Monday Night Football with Peyton and Eli. I like watching the Manning cast with the Manning brothers. I like watching that more than the actual Monday Night Football broadcast itself with Joe Buck and Troy Aikman. I like Joe Buck and Troy Aikman, but I like the Manning cast more. I find the Manning cast more entertaining. Excuse me when I get a drink of water here. Yeah. And I don't think Bill Belichick's going to be on the Manning cast this year as well because he's going to be really focused on coaching the North Carolina Tar Heels. So I wish him well. I wish him well for North Carolina. All right. So I don't know who's going to replace Belichick on the Let's Go show with Jim Gray, but that's a great show. But the year before, they had Tom Brady. Yeah, the year before they had Tom Brady, I believe. Frequently. So yeah, same thing. That show would be during the season, the NFL season. Okay. We're almost at the end, folks. Okay. Before I talk about my #1 favorite sports talk show of all time, there's actually 2 shows that are no longer a show. There are 2 former shows that I listen to, which means they're no longer a show. One's on Amazon Music, and one's on Sirius XM. The one on Amazon Music is called The Elle Duncan Show. Elle Duncan is the WNBA countdown host, I believe, and she's also a regular Sports Center anchor. All right. Her podcast was on Amazon Music. Okay. Not a huge fan of that show, but I remember I was on Amazon Music scrolling, and I found one called The Elle Duncan Show, and I'm like, oh, I've heard of Elle Duncan before on ESPN, so why not listen to that show? I don't listen to that, at the time, I didn't listen to that show very often, like once in a while. So, the reason why she ended her show, it was because she basically said it was time for her to make a change. Yeah. So, her show ended a couple months ago, back in May. And another show that I listen to sometimes on SiriusXM, Beadle and Decker, with Michelle Beadle and Cody Decker. I listen to that show more than the Elle Duncan Show. That show was a 3-hour show from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Central, so on at the exact same time with the Rich Eisen Show and the Michael Kay Show. The reason why that show came to an end was because they got an announcement that the Stephen A. Smith, his show, was going to replace Beadle and Decker's show. with Michelle Beadle and Cody Decker, and basically, mainly Michelle Beadle, she got offended. She didn't like that decision, and she basically said she went to the SiriusXM's offices, and she said, "I don't respect Stephen A. Smith," and they fired her the next day. And they pulled the plug on that show, just like Live PD. I know, it's very unfortunate. I'm not a huge fan of that. I wasn't a huge fan of that show, but I do like listening to that show sometimes. It is kind of funny sometimes. So, that show made its debut, I believe, in August of 2023. So yeah, not even 2 years when that show lasted. And it's weird that when that show got fired, I believe, yeah, it was right when the NBA Finals began. And they do talk a lot about basketball. You know, Michelle Beadle's a big NBA fan, just like Stephen A. Smith. And I was hoping to listen to their thoughts on the NBA Finals, but their show the plug got pulled on that show because of what Michelle Beadle said about Stephen A. Smith. Even though Stephen A. Smith won't come back to SiriusXM until the day after Labor Day. It's like, they could have just suspended Michelle Beadle for a couple of weeks. They could have done that instead, but no, they fired her and they pulled the plug on that show. Very, very unfortunate. Yeah, and at the worst time, during the NBA Finals. It sucks. Okay, guys, we're almost done here. I'm going to talk about the channels, the SiriusXM channels that I added to my library that I would listen to sometimes. Okay, there's one called MLB Network Radio. Okay, so when I'm in the mood, I would listen to that channel live, mainly during the World Series, or after the World Series is over, I would listen to that channel. Same with NHL Network Radio. After the Stanley Cup Final came to an end, I would listen to that show as well. But mainly MLB Network. And MLB is great for radio. It really is. It's really great for radio. I would listen to some games sometimes on SiriusXM instead of watching it on TV. Mainly during the MLB postseason. Yeah. Because I like the announcers more than the TV announcers. I like the radio announcers more than the TV announcers. Plus, Fox has that weird looking score bug that I don't like. And TBS's score bug is too small. Although I prefer TBS than Fox. TBS has some more well-known announcers than Fox. But I like the radio announcers more, you know? So you can call me old school. I'm kind of going old school when it comes to, you know, listening to baseball games. So I remember, you know, the team that I root for is the Houston Astros, and I kind of got into listening to the Houston Astros radio broadcast on SiriusXM. Yeah, you know, I would listen to their games during the postseason because, you know, that's the team that I wish them the best, you know. Okay, so then over the years I got into... I looked up a list on Wikipedia to see all of the announcers, all of the team's radio announcers. And some of them, I've heard them before. Well-known names, okay? So, here are the teams that I added to my SiriusXM library for radio. Boston Red Sox, Chicago White Sox, Houston Astros, Los Angeles Dodgers, Milwaukee Brewers, New York Mets, New York Yankees, San Francisco Giants, and the St. Louis Cardinals. Yeah, I added those to my library because I like their radio announcers. San Francisco Giants, John Miller would be the play-by-play announcer. If not him, it would be Dave Fleming. Okay. Yeah, it's great. And sometimes John Miller would be the TV announcer for the San Francisco Giants. Okay. So yeah, how many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's 9 teams. So if any of those 9 teams are in the postseason, most likely I would listen to their radio announcer. There's a channel called SiriusXM Scorebug, or no, not Scorebug, Scoreboard, excuse me, where they would, every 10 minutes, it's like they update it, they would give us scores. You know, there's a guy named, I think, Frank Trachtenberg, who gives us the scores of what happened during the day or during the evening. You know, as of this recording, it's the MLB season, so, you know, he would say the scores of all the MLB games every night. And then, you know, of course, when American football season begins, he will do the same thing. And he will give you the schedule, what time these teams are playing the next day. And that's great, you know. And then, of course, Pro Wrestling Nation 24/7, I mentioned that channel. NBC Sports Radio. And okay, so during the election last year, I listened to some news networks: CNN, Fox News, NBC News, and C-SPAN. Those are like the 4 major news networks that I would listen to. All right. Again, I'm not a big political guy. I would mainly listen to Dan Abrams, Bill O'Reilly, and sometimes Stephen A. Smith. Okay, the Hunting Unlimited soundtracks came to an end because they don't have as much as the Truck Simulator soundtracks. So guys, I'm almost done here. I know this is a long episode. I didn't thought it would be this long, but this is what happens when you give a lot of details as best as possible. Damn, this is probably gonna be a 2-hour episode. This is probably gonna be a 2-hour episode. Okay, so, and then there's a channel called Canada Talks. Yeah, there's a Canadian channel. There's a Canadian category, and there's a channel called Canada Talks. I think that's also a political show, but I mainly, sometimes, I would get that for CFL games. Yes, you can listen to CFL games on that channel, which I've done before. But I mainly watch CFL games on TV. But once in a while, I would listen to the game on the radio. Alright? Yeah, I checked to see, how did I find that out? I checked to see if the Grey Cup, which is, you know, like their Super Bowl, I checked to see if the Grey Cup is going to be on radio, and it was. And that's how I found that channel, Canada Talks. And then, excuse me for a moment, I gotta sneeze. Okay, I just paused my recording, just so I can sneeze here. And there are also music channels that I added to my library, and those are... There's one called, I gotta move my fan because it's blocking the screen. Yeah, my computer, my main computer. Music channels. There's one called The Big Easy for, you know, New Orleans jazz for Mardi Gras, since I live in South Louisiana. Another one called The Real Jazz Just Music channel. The Billy Joel channel. They were advertising that. Another one called B.B. King's Bluesville channel. B.B. King, one of the greatest, if not the greatest blues musician of all time. And there's one called the Beatles channel, and another one called the Grateful Dead channel. Yeah. People still talk about those bands to this day. People still talk about B.B. King to this day. Same with the Beatles and the Grateful Dead. I like all those artists, okay, and it's great. They have their own channel. My number one favorite is the Grateful Dead. I've been really getting into listening to that band. I love the Grateful Dead, and I have Amazon Music. I made my own playlist. In fact, I made 2 playlists of the Grateful Dead. One for their studio songs, and the other one, their live album songs. They're well known for their live albums. It's great. And this year, they started in 1965. This is their 60th anniversary. And the Beatles started in 1960, so this is their 65th anniversary. So this year, I listened to a lot of Beatles and Grateful Dead songs, and I love it. It is great. And no wonder why they have their own channels on SiriusXM 24/7, just like Pro Wrestling Nation, MLB Network Radio, NFL Network Radio, NHL Network Radio, and NBA Network Radio. It's great. And one last channel. I mentioned that I was playing the Truck Simulator soundtracks. Well, there's a channel called Road Dog Trucking Radio. Road Dog Trucking Radio. It's a truck driving channel. And sometimes that channel and these other channels that I mentioned on SiriusXM, sometimes I would listen to these channels live on my way to work during the weekdays, Monday through Fridays. It's about a 20-minute drive, so I would listen to live radio sometimes. So, like, I would do it like, I would play one channel for a week. So 1 week I would listen to Road Dog Trucking Radio on my way to work from Mondays to Fridays. 1 week I'll do the same thing with MLB Network Radio. Same with NHL Network Radio. The Beatles, Grateful Dead, for music, Pro Wrestling Nation. Depending on, what I'm in the mood for. During certain times of the year, World Series, okay, I gotta listen to MLB Network Radio. The Stanley Cup Final, NBA Finals, both NHL and NBA Network radios. WrestleMania, Busted Open, SiriusXM's 24/7 Pro Wrestling Nation. You get the picture. So, yeah, Road Dog Trucking Radio, because if you follow the main channel, Eric Super Magnificent, American Truck Simulator is the top game played on that channel. Okay, and yeah, you get to hear truck drivers tell their stories, and that's a great channel to listen to when you're traveling, because truck drivers, they travel for a living. That's what they do, So, it's a great channel. Oh, and there's two more. But I also added this show on the list. I think the most popular show on SiriusXM, in my opinion, I think it's the Howard Stern Show. The Howard Stern Show, yes. So, Howard Stern has 2 channels of his. One called Howard Stern 100, which is recent Howard Stern, and Howard Stern 101. It plays archives. Yes, archives of the Howard Stern Show, because the Howard Stern Show has been around for a long time. Now, I'm not a huge Howard Stern fan, but some episodes I would listen to, and mainly his interviews. Yeah, there's a category where he would You can find interviews of the Howard Stern show. It's great. Depending on who he's talking to. I mentioned, I love listening to music. One of them, that he had Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins, and man, I listened to that entire interview. Really good. He had Lady Gaga on. I grew up listening to Lady Gaga in the late 2000s and early 2010s. Great interview. He had John Cena on. So yeah. And Howard Stern's got that voice of his, and he's another guy that doesn't look like his age. Another radio guy that does not look like his age. So, yeah. I don't listen to that show very much, but sometimes I would. So yeah. I think that show's live in the mornings for like 3 hours or 4 hours. I don't know exactly, because I never listen to that show live, just like most of these shows, because there's so many shows to listen to. Okay. Oh, there's actually 2 more shows. One more show before I get into my number 1 favorite show. Back to SiriusXM. This is a morning show from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. Central. It's on at the exact same time as the Dan Patrick Show, and that is Shine on Sports with Adam Shine. Yes. And this was one of the first shows that I listened to on my way to work. And I'm like, wow, this guy's got a great voice. A lot of people call in this show, they talk about big sports stories. But of course, when NFL season begins, that's the main sport that they talk about, just like a lot of these other big sports talk shows. And I get it. Again, whether you like the National Football League or not, it is the number 1 sports league in America. So, yeah, I got into that show. 3 hours. And here's the cool thing about listening to these shows on SiriusXM. They have chapters. So that way you don't have to listen to the entire episode. If there's a certain section, a certain segment of the show that I don't care about, I'm skipping it. I'm not a big NBA fan. So if they talk about NBA during the off season, I don't care. I'm skipping it. So that's the best part, Yeah, Shine on Sports. He's actually been on SiriusXM for 21 years. And yeah, I really like it. I like his laugh. He has like a funny laugh. And the last show, which is my number 1 favorite sports talk show, and that is Mad Dog Unleashed with Christopher Mad Dog Russo. He is the best, in my opinion. He is the best. People say that he might be overreacting, and sometimes he may be overreacting, but I find it entertaining when he overreacts, especially when he rants. Oh, it's funny. He's been around for a long time. In the old days, he used to be with Mike Francesa. Many considered that was like the greatest sports talk show ever. But that was before I got into sports when that show ended. But Mad Dog Unleashed with Christopher Mad Dog Russo, it is my number 1 favorite sports talk show, because sometimes I would listen to that show live. I would. It's on from 2 to 5 p.m. Central Time on Mondays to Fridays. Yeah. I would say that is my number 1 favorite sports talk shows. And the thing is, what I like about him is he doesn't talk about the same sport every time. I think his number 1 favorite sport is baseball. And I remember he used to be on MLB Network. He had a show called High Heat. Yeah, High Heat with Christopher Russo. Sometimes I would watch that show. And this was before I got SiriusXM. And when I got SiriusXM, one day I was browsing through the channels, and there was a channel called Mad Dog Sports Radio. And when I'm like, wait a minute, isn't Mad Dog Christopher Russo? It is. Yeah, he has his own channel. So Shine on Sports with Adam Shine is also on Mad Dog Sports Radio. Beetle and Decker, the show that is no longer a show, that used to be on SiriusXM's Mad Dog Sports Radio as well. That show would come on in between Shine on Sports with Adam Shine and Mad Dog Unleashed with Christopher Mad Dog Russo, which means the Stephen A. Smith show is going to take over that. Actually, I think his show is going to be 2 hours instead of 1. I think his show is going to be from 12 to 2 p.m., which means it'll be on at the same time as the Michael K. show and the Rich Eisen show. I'm looking forward to that. So, but yeah, for Christopher Mad Dog Russo, he is my number one favorite sports talk podcast, mainly because he talks about a variety of sports. You know, of course he talks about football and baseball and basketball. Not much hockey. A lot of these shows, they don't talk much about hockey until the playoffs, and I get it. But he also talks about golf, even though I'm not a golf fan. But he also talks about tennis. I am a tennis fan, technically. Not many shows talk about tennis besides Holding Court with Patrick McEnroe. But I always like listening to Mad Dog Christopher Russo talk about tennis and baseball. So that's also where I get my tennis news and my baseball news from. And he's got that well-known voice of his, you know. He'll be like, and good afternoon, everybody, you know, and he would have great guests on his show. Man. So, I would say he is my number one favorite sports talk show. If you were to ask me that question last year or the year before, I would say it would have been a tie with him, Mad Dog, and the old Michael K. show. Back when Michael K. was with Don LaGreca and Peter Rosenberg, I really liked that show too. I really liked the Michael K. show when he was with Don LaGreca and Peter Rosenberg. And both those shows were on at the same time. So yeah, those were my top two shows in 2023 and 2024. It was like a tie. But if I had to pick one, I guess I would have to pick Mad Dog Unleash just by a little over the Michael K. show. But now, Mad Dog really is my number one favorite sports talk show. Which means, yes, I like the old Michael K. show when he was with Don LaGreca and Peter Rosenberg more than his solo show. But I really do like his solo show. Don't get me wrong. His solo show is great. But I liked it a little more when he was with Don LaGreca and Peter Rosenberg. That three-man show. Listen, a lot of these shows, it's a one-man show. Sometimes two people. I think the most popular sports talk show right now, I think it's the Pat McAfee show. And I'm not a huge fan of Pat McAfee, like a lot of people are, so that's why I don't listen to his show. But his show has like 5 people with him. I'm not a big fan of big group sports talk podcasts. That's just me, but yeah. Mad Dog Unleashed with Christopher Mad Dog Russo is, in fact, my number one sports talk podcast. He is entertaining. I love the way he talks, the way he rants. He you know, he talks. He talks like a dog. He gets mad like a dog, like yap, 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 barking like a dog, He likes to run his mouth. He's funny, man. Like, I remember one of his well-known rants, the Mike Tyson Jake Paul fight. He was complaining about that, man. It's so funny, So, yeah. Mad Dog Unleashed with Christopher Mad Dog Russo. And sometimes, if you follow my episodes of KSN, sometimes I would bring him up, So, yeah, guys, there you have it. 2 hours. Me talking about my favorite sports talk podcasts. So there you go, folks. This podcast will now be on a hiatus. I hope you enjoyed. If you listened to this entire episode, thank you very much. And comment below if you listen to any of these shows. Okay? I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Take care. Thank you for listening to Keith Sports News.